So, welcome everyone. Good morning. This morning, I want to talk about the relationship between self awareness and harmful behavior. And, one of the things we really pay attention to on this path is self awareness. It's really considered a treasured quality on the path. And it is the foundation of ethical living, compassionate action, and spiritual growth. I mean, once we're aware, we can make more intentional choices. We can make less harmful choices, and that's why it's such an important intention to set. And when we reflect on the idea that self-awareness and harmful behavior rarely go together, we really look at a profound truth there. The more deeply we understand ourselves, our thoughts, our motives, our actions, our conditioning, on, the less likely we are to cause harm to ourselves or others. So I want to explore this idea a little bit with you this morning, emphasizing the practical application and the practical impact of self-awareness in our daily lives as a way of reducing harmful behavior or unskillful choices. It may not be blatantly harmful, but it can certainly be unskillful. And as you know, much of our cultivation of self-awareness on the path is through our mindfulness practice, our introspection, our sort of checking in with ourselves, as Pat Coffey says, taking the internal weather report of what's going on inside. It's the practice of being present, of observing our thoughts, our judgments, our emotions, our actions, everything as it arises, just watching it as it comes up. And this kind of awareness really helps us see the interconnection of all beings, but more importantly, perhaps, to understand the causes and effects of our own behavior. What are our triggers? Where do we get our buttons pushed? This sort of thing. When we are self-aware, and we've cultivated that practice, we're more likely to pause and reflect before we act. Okay, we look before we leap. And this allows us to choose responses that are guided by wisdom, guided by compassion. Contrast that with ignorance, shooting from the hip, autopilot, reactivity, impulsiveness, all the things that we know get us into trouble. And let's be clear that self-awareness is not an intellectual exercise. It's not just something, a concept. It's a lived experience. We must incorporate it into our daily lives because it transforms how we relate to the world. It helps us see how we impact the world, okay? How we impact the others in our world. It enables us to recognize the more subtle motivations behind our actions. Where is that coming from? Why did I just do that? So motivations that come from greed, hatred, and delusion, the three poisons that the Buddha taught, we begin to see them more clearly. We see where our greed, our hatred, and our aversion or hatred and delusion are informing our behavior. Because these unwholesome roots are the source of so much harmful behavior. So the real takeaway from today is without self-awareness, we act on autopilot, driven by these negative tendencies, often unaware of the suffering that we're causing, both to ourselves and those around us. Let me say that again. Without self-awareness, we're often on autopilot, mindlessly responding, driven by negative tendencies, unaware of the suffering that we cause to ourselves and others. Contrast that with self-awareness, where we recognize these impulses as they arise and choose to act differently. We put in the pause. We catch ourselves because we know ourselves. We've come to know ourselves. Harmful behavior, and there's a gamut of it, as you know, whether it's in the form of harsh words, physical harm, self-destructive habits, almost always arise from a lack of awareness. Those behaviors arise from impulsivity. We just respond. We just respond without even thinking about it. We react without thinking about it. We shoot from the hip without considering the consequences of our actions. When we are disconnected and out of touch with our inner world, we don't see nor do we appreciate the results of our actions. Take, for example, when anger arises, which is something we all deal with. It can feel overwhelming and justified in the moment. By golly, you did something, I'm going to strike back, I'm going to, punch you in the nose or whatever. Without self-awareness, we just lash out. We damage our relationships. We cause suffering to ourselves and others. But with self-awareness, we can notice anger arising. We can observe it without acting impulsively on it. And we can respond in a skillful way that is thoughtful and kind. It doesn't mean we don't express the anger or ask for some recourse, but we do it in a skillful, thoughtful, and kind way, not a lashing out, impulsive, reactive way. From the perspective of Buddhism, harmful behavior is rooted very often in ignorance, one of the poisons, the inability to see reality clearly. And what self-awareness helps us do is dispel this ignorance, shines a light on our intentions, a light on our emotions, a light on our conditioned patterns of behavior. Oh, this is a hot button for me. I really need to keep my awareness of it on the front burner. It allows us to understand the impermanent and interconnected nature of things, which is another way of reducing our tendency to act out of selfishness, act out of fear, act out of a need to hit back. When we are truly present and aware, it's more difficult to engage in actions that intentionally harm others. We just see what's going on. We just don't want to go there. We recognize that our suffering and that person's suffering are intertwined. If I lash out at you, I suffer from having behaved badly. You suffer because I've just, insulted you or responded angrily to you. To bring this principle of self-awareness into our daily lives, there's a number of practices I want to review. These are all familiar to you. Mindful breathing, meditation. Regular meditation helps us develop a deeper awareness of our thoughts and emotions. When we focus on the breath, whether on the cushion, on the chair, or just on daily life, we begin to learn to stay present and observe what's coming up for us without impulsively reacting. The breath is such an important anchor in that sense because it helps us build in a space between the stimulus and the response, which within that space, within that pause, are opportunities to choose actions that are skillful and non-harming. So it's like tapping the brakes a little bit. If we're practicing the 5 precepts, the ethical guidelines, the so-called lay precepts for living a life of non-harm, these are, as you will recall, refraining from killing, from stealing. It's worded, don't take what is not freely given, sexual misconduct, harmful speech, including lying, and using intoxicants that cloud the mind. When we embrace these precepts, when we make them part of our ethical foundation, they alone help us become more aware of our actions and the impact on others. So, write them down, stick them on your mirror, read them when you brush your teeth every morning, put them on your refrigerator, do whatever you have to do. But the precepts, these basic 5 precepts, cover a lot of ground in terms of helping us rein in our tendency toward harmful behavior. And then just engaging in some daily reflection. Take time to reflect on our actions. How did I do today? Were my words and actions motivated by kindness and compassion? Did I unintentionally, inadvertently harm someone? Boy, do I not want to do that again. This whole practice of just sort of taking an inventory of self-reflection helps us learn from our mistakes. We don't do this to beat ourselves up or to engage in a lot of second arrow stuff. We do this with a spirit of kindness toward ourselves, but to strengthen our commitment to non-harming. The risk here when we engage in reflection is we want to be self-critical and self-judging, which is not the intention. It's just to say, gee whiz, I don't want to do that again. And then the cultivation of empathy. This self-awareness goes hand in hand with empathy. When we are mindful of our own suffering and challenges, we become more attuned and more empathic to the experiences of others, which leads to actions that are more compassionate, more supportive, rather than harmful. We recognize interdependence, that all beings are interconnected. The idea here from the Buddha is that when we harm another, we ultimately harm ourselves. When we cultivate awareness of this interdependence, we are more likely to act in ways that promote harmony and well-being for all. Now, even with self-awareness, harmful tendencies will arise. That's part of being human. It's not a failing on our part. It doesn't mean we're a bad person. It just means that once in a while, stuff's going to happen that we would prefer that it not. But the key difference is how we respond to these tendencies when we are inclined toward less skillful behavior. Instead of being swept away by them and caught up in them and self-judging and beating ourselves up, we use them to investigate their root causes. We use these moments when we act unskillfully as teachers. What did I just do? What can I learn from that? For example, if I speak harshly to you, if I have this tendency when I'm stressed, I can look at that, find healthier ways to manage my stress, more skillful ways to respond when I feel triggered, and so forth. Because over time, with our path, with mindfulness, with intentional effort, these harmful tendencies lose their potency, they lose their power. That's the beauty of cultivating self-awareness. We not only reduce our own harmful behavior, but we serve as a role model to inspire others in our life to do the same, because our actions create a ripple effect around us. A kind word, a thoughtful gesture, a moment of patience can have a far-reaching consequence. Spreading peace and harmony in ways we can't even perceive, we don't even acknowledge, we don't even recognize. But when we act out of ignorance or harm, the ripple effect of suffering can also be immense. If we act that way in a group setting or towards someone, it just sort of affects everybody in the room, when someone acts harmfully or unskillfully. And not contributing to a more compassionate society. This is the essence of the Buddha's teachings on right mindfulness. It's not just about personal transformation, but it's about creating a world where all beings can live more free from harm. Self-awareness and harmful behavior are inherently incompatible, as I said today at the outset. When we are truly present and aware, we see all the interconnections. We see the profound impact of our choices and our actions. This awareness, as we progress on our path, leads to choices that are guided by wisdom, compassion, and non-harming. The journey to cultivating self-awareness, it's not easy. I don't want to suggest that it's just, I'm going to check the box, but it is a powerfully transforming practice. With mindfulness, ethical living, self-reflection, we reduce harmful tendencies and foster a life of kindness and understanding. And how much easier is that on ourselves? We don't have to carry the weight and the load of all our guilt and regret about having acted badly. Invariably, that stuff comes back around on us. As the Buddha himself taught, quote, "With our thoughts we make the world. With our thoughts we make the world." When we cultivate self-awareness, we ensure that the world we create is peaceful rather than one of harm. So that's some thoughts this morning on the incompatibility of self-awareness and harmful behavior.